Добрий день, вітаю всіх, хто приєднався до нас. Мене звуть Ольга Таманова, я рада вітати вас у медіа-центрі України сьогодні. Наш захід сьогодні буде присвячений, будемо говорити про зміни умови перетину кордону, також поговоримо про ситуацію на наших кордонах. І у нас у студії сьогодні Андрій Демченко, речник Державної прикордонної служби України.
The spokesperson of the State Border Guard Service of Ukraine. So, Mr. Andrii, let's start with the topic that really resonated with our society, specifically when it comes to the journalists, representatives of media sector. We know that the exit abroad for this category was made more complicated. The mechanism that was based on the request letters sent from the ministry that supported exit for the representatives of the media community or representatives of culture sector abroad. So to what extent is this issue already solved? What is the State Border Guard Service going to check as this category of our citizens is living abroad? Good morning, everybody. So first of all, let me tell you that the Ministry of Culture reported back in the day why they had undertaken such a decision not to support this category of culture sector representatives in order not to create speculations and to standardize the procedure, so to say. And now we see that the amendments were made to the resolution number 57 on border crossing rules for the citizens of Ukraine. It was updated with the dedicated articles for the representatives of culture and media sector. And those articles clearly set forth the algorithm for reporting to the Ministry of Culture on the necessity to leave Ukraine to take part in these or those events. So the procedure was set forth on how to submit the application to make sure that the Ministry of Culture has sufficient time to consider them and to come up with the letter, to draw up the letter, to the request letter to the administration of the State Border Guard Service about the necessity to allow such category of citizens to cross the border. But directly in the checkposts in the border, our inspectors are going to check the following conditions, which are also set forth in those articles for border crossing. In those provisions, those are the request letter from the Ministry of Culture, clearly setting forth their destination and the period of staying abroad. Then it should describe the event the person is going to, with translation into Ukrainian language. And also they are supposed to bear the military registration document, not such as postponement or exclusion from military registration, but just the properly updated military registration document, either printed out or using the Reserve Plus application. And yet another condition for border crossing for this category of citizens, both the representatives of media and cultural sectors, is the confirmation of their goal of travel in the checkpost. If a person was applying for some event outside Ukraine, but their actual goal is different, they may be refused to cross the border. So what basically has changed fundamentally in those letters? Well, for the State Border Guard Service, nothing has changed. Even before that, we were checking all of those documents listed there, and we just have to understand that it was just clearly standardized in the rules for border crossing for the citizens of Ukraine, where the provisions appeared specifically for the representatives of cultural and media sector to avoid any speculations on this topic. Well, we understand that it was not only the Ministry of Culture and Strategic Communications that were submitting letters like this. So when it comes to other ministries have any rules changed for travel of their experts, say abroad for some events? Well, basically, this standard was applied only for the representatives of media and cultural sectors. All other categories are clearly described in the rules for border crossing. I mean, when it comes to the list of documents that are necessary to cross the border. Well, are there any changes for the booked persons? Are they able to cross the border? Well, there were no changes made for this category. We are acting in their relation just in a way that we did before, and I was reiterating it a number of times that the representatives of media sector, representatives of cultural sector, they could, even before the Ministry of Culture and Strategic Communications, even before they said they would not send any more letters like that, when there was a pause, if those people were booked, they could leave Ukraine without any letters from Ministry of Culture. To do that, they had to be booked, they had to bear a military registration document, either in a soft or hard copy of it, and basically the business trip paperwork. And based on that, the State Bodyguard Service personnel was letting those people who were booked, they could leave Ukraine for the purposes of the business trip. Well, thank you for your comprehensive answers. Now, I would like to ask you about the situation in the border crossings with the European Union countries. What is the situation over there? Is there any concentration of people or vehicles in the border checkposts? Well, after the winter holidays, the passenger flow has weakened, and during weekdays it's about 65-70,000 persons per day, both entering and leaving Ukraine, I mean both ways. And during weekends the passenger flow is intensifying up to 80-85,000 passengers both ways. Generally 85% of the citizens who cross the border are the Ukrainian citizens, the citizens of Ukraine. Meanwhile, 15% are the foreigners. We're not observing any domination of either those who leave or those who enter Ukraine. In fact, the dynamics is 50-50. There are days when sometimes a couple of thousands more people leave Ukraine, but on the next day more people may come in. Like, for example, during the last day, 6,000 more people entered Ukraine rather than left it. And when the passenger flow has waned after the New Year holidays, now there are no lines in the checkposts, in none of them. Probably a couple dozens of cars which could be just waiting in line, but that's not real line actually. Well, when it comes to the dynamics of violations of border crossing, what are you observing there? Well, unfortunately, the attempts to cross the border in illegal way are continuing, both in checkposts, when people try to use counterfeit documents or to falsify the conditions for their exit. There are even attempts to bribe the inspectors of the State Bodyguard Service. Sometimes people are trying to hide in the vehicles. For example, last day, a man who was uncovered in the checkpost, who was hiding in the sleeping bag while being transported in a vehicle. However, the majority of such cases is being documented outside the checkpost in the so-called green section of the border, and the unchanging locations are the border with Moldova and Romania, and the least number of cases falls on the border with Poland. There are more violations in the checkposts in the border with Poland. However, the passenger flow is the most intense there, and hence the results, hence the indicators. But at the same time, I cannot say we're documenting some surge in the attempts of crossing the border in illegal way. Actually, if we compare it with January and February, the dynamic is decreasing. But comparing the January and February of this year and the July of the last year, when we were registered the biggest number of those detained in the state border while attempting to cross it in illegal way, currently the decrease is almost 50%. Well, when it comes to our eastern borders, we understand that there is different information about complication of the situation in the Sumy region. So what's going on over there? What is the situation, basically? Well, when it comes to Sumy region, generally, when it comes to all of the borderline, the biggest problem is the shellings that Russia incessantly inflicts on our territory. But again, they continue shelling Kharkiv and Chernihiv region. When it comes to Chernihiv, the number of shellings is the least, but they're still daily. And if we analyze the beginning of this year and this period until this moment, the enemy reformatted their activities. They were mostly using artillery systems to inflict strikes on the Ukrainian border area. Now they mostly use FPV drones, fiber optic drones, other kinds of UAV, and we cannot say we could document decrease of the shellings. It's like 150, 180 shellings only documented by our bodyguard teams. When it comes to Sumy region, everybody's attention is focused on the operation of Ukrainian troops in Kursk regions. There were reports that Russians have breached the border and entered deeply into Ukrainian territory. That situation is not quite true. Obviously, the enemy, even before, was attempting and continues attempting to enter territory of Ukraine to improve their situation in terms of assaulting our positions. Probably they have plans of encircling our group of forces in Kursk region or cutting the logistic ties. So those are the two directions. First is Milenka, the village of Milenka, and another is the village of Zhuravka, the left flank of the Kursk operation. And in the axis of Zhuravka, the enemy sometime before was using the material convoys, moving in the direction of our border, trying to breach it, and all those convoys were burned with the strikes of the units of security and defense forces, including state bodyguard service units. And then the enemy was trying to use the sabotage groups that attempted to enter our territory. And lately, the enemy is attempting to use such sabotage groups in the area of the village of Malenka. Their basic task is to enter our territory, accumulate forces, and then to expand the area of combat operations in our territory. But all those sabotage teams entering the Ukrainian territory are being destroyed by our warriors. And to do it, we use artillery systems, UAVs, in order to prevent the enemy from accumulating forces in our territory. So it's basically a kill zone where all of the Russians die. So basically, all that information about cut of the logistic connections is not quite true. Well, yesterday, the Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces of Ukraine was stating that for the time being, there are no preconditions for having the logistic ways cut. When it comes to the situation with Belarus border, do we observe any changes? Well, fortunately not. This is our priority focus, but at the same time, on that side of the border, we're not observing the creation of any strike forces or accumulation of any forces that could pose a threat to us. At the same time, the task of the reconnaissance is to keep and intelligence is to keep track of this changing situation, whether it may become of threat to us, to make sure that all of the units stationed in that axis could promptly react to any risks, but at the same time, we don't cease our activities in terms of fortification of the border in order to make sure that the Ukrainian defenders, different components of the security and defense forces of Ukraine, could counteract the threat should the situation be changing. Thank you for your answers, dear colleagues. If we have any questions on the floor, please raise your hands and ask them. Thank you, Darina Kolomets. Spilna, starting from the 4th of March, when the rules for border crossing were updated, can you please provide any statistics? What is the number of the border crossings based on those updated rules, and if the people were rejected to cross the border, what was the fundamental reason for that? Well, unfortunately, I'm not having such statistics at hand. Basically, we are going to make a survey of this category of the Ukrainian citizens who are supposed to be crossing the border under these new rules, the representatives of media and cultural sector. What I can state is that our task is not to segregate certain categories. Our task, the task of the inspectors in the checkposts, is to comply with the rules for border crossing for Ukrainian citizens. It applies to that category of citizens. It applies to all other categories of the citizens that are described in the rules for border crossing. Well, basically, when it comes to rejection of border crossing, currently this number is up to 100 persons per day. I mean, it applies to all of the citizens that are either living Ukraine or are prohibited to leave Ukraine or are not in compliance with the rules to cross the border. But previously, those indicators were way higher, specifically when the passenger flow was intensifying and the number of rejections per day could be up to 150, 180 persons. Now it's about that number. So when it comes to this category of population you were asking about, I think that shortly we're going to come up with the analysis of rejections, and we will find out the reasons why people were rejected. For example, they could not be in possession of certain paperwork or otherwise. Well, for our understanding, has this procedure already come into effect? So basically, are there already the representatives of cultural or media sector who were leaving Ukraine under these new rules? Well, in the end of the last week, those changes have taken effect. They've come into full force, and their State Border Guard Service personnel are using those provisions in the checkposts in the border. For what I know, the letters from the Ministry of Culture were coming to the administration of the State Border Guard Service. I cannot tell you what were the exact citizens that were requested to leave Ukraine according to those letters. But again, our task is, regardless the personalities, regardless the dates, to comply with all of the conditions that allow those categories of citizens to cross the border. Well, so basically, the ministry sends the letters to the State Border Guard Service, or is it a person like coming to the State Border Guard Service with this letter? Because you've just said that the ministry has sent letters to the administration. Well, you have to read the rules carefully. The Article 222 it describes those categories, and it clearly says that there should be a letter from the Ministry of Culture and Strategic Communications to the administration of the State Bodega Service. No, I was thinking that the journalist gets the letter, and using that letter, they cross the border. Well, the ministry can even give it to the journalists themselves, but the rules say that the letter should be forwarded directly to the State Bodega Service. Well, dear colleagues, if we have any more questions, let me know. Well, if we do not, I would like to thank you for this information, for this broadcast, and to remind our colleagues that in 8 minutes another briefing is coming, and we are going to discuss the rebuilding of our power grid. Thank you, Mr. Andrii, for this information. Thank you. I would like also to thank our security and defense forces, thanks to whom we can continue doing broadcasts like this. And let's continue working together for our victory. Glory to Ukraine. Glory to the heroes.